and welcome to the Moving Forward Talk Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Collins, along with my friends Emily and Christy. As we always do on our talk show, we're going to demonstrate that life goes on and healing happens if you just keep moving forward. Our topic today is politics and how our approach and ideas and possibly worldview have changed about politics since leaving our high demand group. And if you've ever been part of a high control group, we are pretty sure that you have been told what to think, who to vote for, and how you should go about conducting your lives with respect to politics. I don't know about each of you, but when I was in my high control group, I was indoctrinated to believe that women should never have been given the right to vote, especially because John F. Kennedy was voted into office. Now, having left that high control group, my husband has done research and discovered that, guess what? Mostly men voted for John F. Kennedy and mostly women voted for his opponent. And I really kind of think it's silly because every woman I know has her own ideas and it really doesn't depend on what gender she is, whether she's female or whether, I don't know. Anyway, I think men and women have their own ideas. I don't think it's based around whether they're a man or a woman, although I'm sure it does color our ideas as well. So, Christy, what about you? Did you find that the whole approach to politics while you were in a high control group was sort of weird? Because that's kind of what I feel about now.
Yes, for sure. So I wasn't raised in the high control group. I converted to it as a teenager. So I had a grounding sort of in my family. I was encouraged to speak my mind with my dad. He used to have like lively debates with me, and he'd figure out what I thought about a topic and then take the exact opposite opinion and argue with me about it. Just because I think he was entertained by me trying to argue my points. But yeah, I was always encouraged to have an opinion and to voice that opinion. When I joined the high control group, it was really strange because no one came out and said, "Hey, Christy, you're not allowed to have opinions about things anymore." But there is this undercurrent, especially in the recorded sermons of who we believed was a prophet, that women shouldn't have an opinion on political matters. And that if we do happen to have an opinion on political matters, it should mirror that of our husbands. There were a lot of women in our high control group that did not vote. But there were also quite a few that did, and they justified this despite what the prophet said about women voting by voting with their husbands. So they would figure out what he was going to vote, and then they would just vote exactly the way he was going to vote. And that was sort of the justification that they used for going to the polls. So yeah, it was always something that I kind of never really got a solid, like, from the pulpit teaching, you should never go and vote as a woman. That was just not really said. But there definitely were some strong emphases on conformity within the group. Like, we should all think the same way about political matters. And we should, in principle, all be voting the same way if we do end up going to the polls. And if not all the same as everyone in the congregation, certainly all the same within the household. And that would be a mirror of the man leadership in our household.
That sums it up pretty nicely, Christy. What about you, Emily? What was your experience? Because you did grow up like I did as part of this high control group.
I did grow up in the high control group, and I guess it depended on who you talked to in the group. Some were the vote the way that your husband votes. It's dumb not to vote. You have the right to vote. Use it. And then others, no way would they think about voting. So again, just like every other rule within the group, it kind of depended on how the person's ideal was and how they wanted to twist and manipulate the words to kind of fit their ideal. So, I mean, I was not old enough. Well, I guess I was old enough to vote before I left. I don't even remember. I think I did vote because my family was pretty political. My mom grew up very political, sit down, shut up, and watch the evening news kind of stuff, know what's going on, and Walter Cronkite's on, so here we are. So politics is very, very big in the family, and my mother did vote. I did vote, but I know that there's a local pastor and his wife, she refuses to vote because she doesn't feel that it's the woman's place to vote. So it'll be interesting, the timing of this podcast recording coming out, and I can't wait to see what all of the troll men who sit and watch our podcast have to say. But it's, I think politics, I don't know, is it more or less divisive inside of a high control group? It's pretty interesting. I remember, the all-day services, the special services, and the men are sitting down and roaring back and forth down in the dining hall area about stuff, and I think I tuned more of that out than I actually paid attention to. So I think it's just ridiculous, but being out, kind of taking the path and not having to conform to what everybody around you thinks in politics is kind of nice. Like, what am I? I don't know. I'll vote this way or vote that way. But let me tell you, I think I do have some ideals and some beliefs that definitely fly in the face of how people think I should think.
I have changed so much. And I feel like really the climate has changed a lot in our country since I left the high control group. Having been out of the high control group for 13 years, a lot has happened in 13 years. I grew up in a family that was very interested in politics. My dad, I think he had a religion major and an economics major and a political science minor, if I remember correctly. But yeah, my grandparents were very interested in politics. We always watched 60 Minutes when we were at their house because they had a TV. We did not. And then my grandmother on my mom's side, she worked the polls every year. She would always go down and be a person who watched over the polls and made sure that everybody was registered before they voted and all that good stuff. And it was really kind of tough for me as an only daughter in a very political family to listen to William Branham talk about women not being supposed to vote, especially because I grew up in the era that Roe v. Wade became law. And I remember going to a pro-life function at the college where my father worked and seeing the movie A Silent Scream and just being outraged about what was happening with unborn babies at that age. And then to be told that I shouldn't be going to the polls to stand up for what I thought was right at that time, that was infuriating, honestly. But I still didn't do it. I remember having moved to Jeffersonville, Indiana, which was the headquarters of our high control group. I was surprised when they had church elections and all the women took papers to vote in church. I was like, well, how is that different? How is that different? If we're allowed to vote in church, why should we not be allowed to vote in the secular realm in politics? And then I found out that one of my friends was the opposite political party. And I cried. I was like, how can you be that party? How can you stand for that? And she's like, well, that's not, we don't see it as, standing for that you're so far against it. We see it as being in favor of, individual liberties and so forth. And of course, I was in favor of individual liberties. My parents were homeschoolers, for goodness sake. But, I had a really rough time with that. So I was like 22 years old finding out that one of my friends who went to the same church, she and her family were of the opposite political persuasion. And I was just I was just flabbergasted. And I think part of that was probably because I grew up listening to a lot of Christian radio. And the Christian radio that I listened to was very partisan. There was only one party that was okay to vote for, pretty much. And I would say now, having left the high control group and having seen a lot of other, different media, different news media, instead of only listening to Christian radio, I can see this a lot more nuanced than I thought it was when I was 21, 22 years old, anyway, that's been a little bit of my journey and what I felt like. I remember being thrilled to death when I registered to vote and when I voted for the first time. That was a Facebook post, I voted for the first time. I was, 2012, 41 years old, voting for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. So anyway, that was my journey. Christy, you want to share some more about your journey, or?
Yeah, sure. So, when I was in the high control group, it was kind of like this fight within myself constantly about, do I vote or do I not vote? Every time an election would come around, it was like a question mark. And I think I probably voted about half the time. And I really did have to think it through every single time an election would come up, because I wasn't sure what was right. And there was no definitive answer. When you listen to him rail against women voting, is he talking about Christian women? Because a lot of times he'd say things like, not you Christian sisters, when he would talk about women generally. So maybe he wasn't meaning us. Maybe he was meaning all these other worldly women, they shouldn't be voting and it shouldn't have happened in the first place. But now that it has, we need to use our voice, I don't know. I just went back and forth on it. Since leaving the high control group, I have deconstructed everything that I thought. Faith has been deconstructed for me, and political persuasions have definitely been deconstructed. I kind of went back to the drawing board. I tried to break down and say, okay, so what is important to me when we're looking at what we're voting for? And everybody's going to have a different opinion of what that is. But I had to figure out the things that were important to me. And then I had to say, okay, so on this particular issue, on this particular election, what do I want to vote for in terms of the amendments? And then for candidates, it's a much harder process, but figuring out what is the most important things to me about a candidate, and then debating between the candidates. So, I agree with Jen. When I was in the high control group, I thought everything was black and white. There was good, godly ones that are anointed to be the leaders, and then there are the horrible, awful people, it was one or the other. And when there would be a primary and there's multiple scores of candidates, it still was that way. There was a good candidate and there were kind of gray candidates and there was a bad candidate. So I've had to completely divorce my thinking on that regard. I see a lot of politics as team sports, you align yourself. If you're a Red Sox fan, you're a Red Sox fan to the end. You are never going to vote for never going to root for the Yankees. It really doesn't matter what's going on. That's not what you're going to do, right? And a lot of people approach politics the same way. So I don't know. I have kind of stepped back away from that, and I've really tried to focus on issues in particular, things that are important to me versus things that aren't important to me. And try not to have that mindset of us and them when I'm voting.
I think that's great. Emily, did you want to tell us a little more about your journey?
I think what Christy just said, the us versus them, and that's so a part of politics right now. And I miss being, there was a gentleman that passed away a year ago, that he was of pretty much a completely different political persuasion than I would be. But I loved the opportunity to sit down with him and ask him, why do you believe what you believe? Tell me about it. He wanted to hear why I believe what I believe. And, there's some things he challenged me on. And I think in the deconstruction, and I think when Christy used that, I think a lot of people almost hear that as a dirty word, deconstructing. But I think it's a very healthy thing to break everything down, like you say, and what are your ideals? What do you believe? What do you think? Like, I think that where I'm at now, like, why is government so involved in trying to legislate morality? I don't get it, And having lived overseas, I'll never forget the conversation I had with a friend. And she was like, it's really weird that you Americans are so against marijuana. She's like, it's just a thing here. Don't abuse it. It's no different than having a beer. And I find it interesting that marijuana use is such a giant political firecracker, But why is that? Go round and round politics and then take America out of it and look at all the other countries. Obviously, there's people in other countries watching this. And, there are... I don't like the political system in America. I think we're way too black and white and pigeonholed. And does that come from America's own political or religious background and how it developed? I don't know. I'm not a giant fan of the political system. I'm going to vote, but nobody really fits my ideals. But then I have certain ideals that people would be like, well, you go to church, you shouldn't believe that way. Well, sorry, but I do, because that's where I've landed in life. So that's why I thought talking about politics would be fun, because I think we're going to make everybody mad, because we're definitely not where anybody thinks we should be, us heathen Jezebels here.
That's pretty funny. One thing you guys both talked about was about how polarizing politics can be. And I read a really great book by Jonathan Haidt, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. It has to do with why good people are divided over politics and religion. And it's all about, like you were describing, Christy, tribalism, being on a team, like you said, like team sports. And I'm trying to, it talked about the monkey and the elephant. So, like, the monkey is the brain and the elephant is the sort of like the emotions. And it's said that people think that they make their decisions with their brain, but really a lot of your emotions are really involved in your decision making. And a lot of that has to do with the groups that you belong to. And he's such an interesting guy. He's written another book that someone else recently recommended to me, and that was about called The Anxious Generation. And that talks a lot about us being so absorbed by social media and how that has brought out a lot of anxiety, especially in the younger generation. And I think that's probably a pretty important caution as well, even though that's kind of a sidebar. It's just talking about Jonathan Haidt that just came to mind. But I think that's it's true. There is, and I like what you said, Emily, about I feel like our political system is a false dichotomy. And I don't know if it has always been that way. I know that the Republican Party is relatively young. It came about right around the time of the Civil War. And before that, they didn't have a Republican Party. They had a Democrat Party. And then I forget what was the other one. And I'm feeling horrible as a homeschool mom right now. What was the Whigs? I don't even know. But I feel like we never really had, like for instance, in Israel, there is no one single party there's no two single parties that have a majority of people behind them. So they wind up having to make a coalition government by figuring out what are the most important concepts or the most important ideas for the greatest number of people. And I think that would be really healthy, a really healthy way to govern. Not that I think Israel has everything figured out at all, but I I told somebody a few years ago, I think the United States needs at least one more party, because there's so much about both parties that I could agree with, and so much about both parties that I could disagree with. I really find myself torn a lot, because it's like it's like you were talking about, Christy, you have to determine what your priorities are. What is the most important thing at this election for you? And I still go back a lot to the 80s in my thinking. And I know that that's really backward, but, and for that fact, I'm going to have a tough time voting, honestly, this election. And I think there are probably a lot of people in my shoes who are going to have a tough time voting this election. And I hate that. I hate that about our country. I feel like we should have, strong political candidates from more than just two parties. And where are the good people too who want to run for office? And why are we stuck with what a lot of people don't really want to vote for in both parties? I don't get that. Yeah. It's like, what happened to the good political science majors?
Yeah, our political science majors at all.
Yeah.
There's so many people in politics that are from backgrounds that are different, and I think that that's a positive thing, but there's also this real lapse of understanding that experience isn't a bad thing. And having experience in the public sector is a positive when you're going to be running what is the public sector. So I think that comes from a distrust of government, and I think that that's probably well earned over time. But it is kind of sad, right? Because we have generations of people who did the work, put in the experience, and then they're not getting to run for office. There might be some really great candidates out there, but because of their background in government that isn't trusted anymore, they're being overlooked. And I find that really sad. Although I do think having people from diverse backgrounds is a positive in politics overall. It's just there's this balancing act, right? Like, you want the experienced people to continue using their experience to better the system, but you also need new blood regularly to bring new ideas to the table. So I think that's kind of like a hard place. It makes it hard coming at it from when we leave a high control group and we overthink everything. I don't know if you guys are that way, but I certainly if I have to make a decision about voting, it's precious to me, because there was a time in my life where it wasn't a guarantee. If there had been a pastor in the pulpit in the Message Church when I was a part of the high control group that said I shouldn't be voting, I wouldn't have voted. And realizing that, it's just humbling, and it makes me really treasure this freedom and right that I have to go to the polls and speak my mind and voice my opinion through voting.
So I did a little bit of research while we were talking, and the name of the book that I was trying to think of is called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. And he's not a Christian. It sounds like a Christian book. It's not. The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And that's a really good, thought-provoking book if you're interested in that type of topic. But I did also want to share one other thing. I know we talked about talking about Christian nationalism, and I'm not sure where nationalism leaves off and Christian nationalism begins. And I'm also not sure that nationalism is always a bad thing. So maybe I'm still stuck in the 80s with that too, or the 70s, because when I was a little girl in 1976, my mom made me the cutest little outfit, and it was a bicentennial dress, and it was like a prairie dress, so that I could be like the girls back in 1776 when our country became a nation. So we had parades and everybody waved the flag, and I grew up being pretty patriotic, and I would say that's where my heart is still. I still get choked up when I hear the national anthem. I still get choked up when I see a veteran carrying a flag. My grandfather was a veteran of World War II. He was in London when it was being bombed. He would have to take shelter in bunkers when the Nazi pilots went overhead, and he was in France. He was delivering messages, and I think he ended up behind enemy lines at one point and had to use the map that was sewed into his clothing. That was a cloth map that he carried with him to get back into friendly territory. But that's the kind of thing that sticks with your family. It becomes part of who you are. It's part of the fabric of your identity. And maybe having that strong heritage on both sides helped me when it was time to decide that I was something other than a follower of my high control group, because I had this other identity. I had this identity as a granddaughter of a veteran. I had this identity as a granddaughter of a woman who worked the polls, and so I think I was more that than I was a follower of William Branham.
I have a strong military background. My dad was in the Air Force up until the time I was 14 or 15. My cousin was a Marine. He deployed to Iraq multiple times. He came home with disability as a result of his service. My uncle or my grandfather was in the Air Force. He worked on bomber planes during World War II. So I have always felt very patriotic as well. My husband actually applied to officership when we were in college as an engineer. And so we was very close to being a military family. That ended up not happening. So, and there wasn't anything, we wanted it to happen. He just didn't get selected for officership. And there's only so many of them for engineers. So yeah, I've always been, the same way, Jen. I think about, the sacrifices of our veterans, and it makes me, really thankful to live in a country like we do, that has stood up for the oppressed around the world throughout time. And for all of its faults, I'm still very proud and happy to be an American citizen and have all of the rights and privileges that come with being that. For me, the difference between patriotism and nationalism is this recognition that despite living in this great, great country, there is a greater world and there's other people that have value elsewhere. And trying to underscore their humanity because they don't live here and they're not Americans is what differentiates patriotism and nationalism, in my opinion.
Thanks. That's a great clarification, Christy. And thanks for sharing your background as well. What are your thoughts, Emily?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. When we were talking about Christian nationalism, and then you talked about patriotism. So, back to what I said about legislating morality. So Christian nationalism says we're a Christian nation founded on Christian values. Therefore, we must make all of our laws to fit Christian ideals and force our ideals on others, which blew up in their face, ironically, because my husband actually worked for the AFA and knew the Heritage Foundation and knew the behind the scenes of that. And when the Project 2025 came out, he was just like, oh my goodness, these stupid people. He said, I talked to them about that years ago because they're like, well, we need to make this rule and make this rule. But then isn't it ironic that when, quote unquote, the other side wants to make this rule and that rule, oh, we're being oppressed. They're making rules that are just flying in the face of our values and oh my goodness, the end is near, So listening to what Pete had to say about Project 2025 was quite interesting. He's like, these guys are a bunch of idiots. But that is the Christian nationalism wanting to push these ideals down. And then, Pete is kind of a history buff. And he's like, our founding fathers, they were so great. He can go through the history of all of them. And, good old Benjamin Franklin going over to Paris and testing the goods. And it's pretty much assumed and based on his medical reports that he had syphilis that he picked up when he was over there messing around. Great founding fathers that had, slaves and all this stuff. Yeah, this is what Christianity or what our nation is built upon. So it's just, it is politics has become a high control group within itself, and people have just turned, I think, just, it's weird, it's bizarre what's going on. But no, I'm totally patriotic. My grandpa, he earned a Purple Heart in World War II. Fortunately, didn't pass away from it, so that's how I'm here, because my dad was born after the war. But definitely believe in, being proud of who you are within your country, but your country is not the end-all be-all either. Having lived overseas and seeing people within their own countries and their own patriotism. So I think as a Christian, that kind of is an illustration and should be an illustration of God's kingdom. We're not all created to worship God the same. Every country and every nation kind of has their own unique things that have made them who they are, and they're not any less than or greater than. And I think that's an important thing to remember moving out of a high control group and thinking about politics is, we're not looking at being morally superior in one way or another, but doing the best we can to love others, love God and serve others. And I think that's been lost a lot in politics these days, but that's kind of my soapbox. So I think there's a very clear distinction between Christian nationalism and patriotism. And I think Christian nationalism damages and hurts a lot of people, and it really pisses me off.
So one thing that comes to mind too, I have always said when an election is over, I've had my adult children talk to me about, well, what about, somebody so-and-so won, or this party won or something. And I said, look, whoever won, they swear to uphold the Constitution. They believe in free speech. They believe in freedom of religion. All the Bill of Rights, that is what they stand for. They're American, and they stand for American values. So just because they're the opposite side of a political coin that gets flipped, they're still worthy of respect, and they're still, I believe in praying for our leaders too, regardless of whether I happen to agree with all their policies or not. So, yeah, that's kind of where I land, and I've seen that meme around a lot, no matter what the elephant and the donkey are doing, remember that the Lion of Judah is still on the throne, and the Lamb is still the King of Kings. So that's where I try to find my stability, I guess, in what I think when I look around and see the world that seems like it gets a little bit more messed up all the time. And my husband keeps reminding me, well, back in the Middle Ages, they were worried about the young kids coming up and how they were too lazy and, they didn't have good table manners and all that sort of thing. He's like, every generation thinks that the next generation coming up is so awful. And then that generation comes up and they think the one after them is so awful. So, he does a good job of, I don't know, looking at things maybe from a relative perspective or something. I don't know, putting that historical context in it.
And don't forget the humanity within it. When you were talking, it sparked a memory. A number of years ago, I was on a giant audiobook kick, and I listened back to back, and I would highly recommend it for people. I listened to Sarah Palin's Going Rogue, and then I listened to Michelle Obama's Becoming book. And to listen to those two women back to back, yeah, they're different, but they're so similar, and talking about media and protecting their family and the hurt of false narratives coming against them and people not actually stopping to listen, and the love they have for their country and for others. I thought I was really glad I did that, listening to that, because, they're two polar opposites in today's political world, but I think they're both great women, and I would challenge anyone who hates Sarah Palin, listen to, read her book. Anyone who hates Michelle Obama, listen to, read her book before you say these crazy things that you're just regurgitating because that's what people are telling you to say. How is that any different than following this false prophet that's telling you what to say? You know, part of the deconstruction, be open, ask questions. Who is this person that you are sending these terrible memes about? They are a human being who has feelings and thoughts and emotions and ideals, and they're not wandering around just trying to be a jerk. You know, there is a reason behind why they're saying what they're saying and what they're doing. Just stop and take a chance to listen to them. Just like my neighbor who I love sitting down and having conversations with, just stop and have a chance to listen to them and hear what they say. And I think there's incredible value in that. And, yeah, I know it touched me to listen to those two books back to back because you just kind of take a step back and go, wait, you know, this is who these women are and this is what makes them beat. And if you gave an excerpt from one book or another and would put the other person, say, so-and-so said this or so-and-so said this, you know, and just manipulate the quotes that way. You could either have someone, yeah, that's the greatest thing ever. Well, actually, this person said it, or, yeah, see, this is why they're so terrible. You know, it's just, it's again, that brainwashing of that perspective. So that's kind of it's another one of my soapboxes. I enjoy trying to, you know, I do have my values that I'll vote on, but I do try to at least stop and listen and understand and go, yep, you know what, this is a free country, you're entitled to your right and your opinion, and I've lived in a country with basically a dictator and where the whole country shuts down for a week during election, and you can hear the helicopter shooting tear gas into the political opponent's compound across the hill from you, and you can see the tanks and hear the gunfire, and you see the political parties building being dragged out onto the road and set on fire. And we do not want to go down that path. We want to be better than that, definitely.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever watched, like, some countries, they have their discourse, like, in their legislative bodies, just like we have on C-SPAN, you know, like the conversations that happen in the halls of Congress. When you listen to other countries, it's often really exciting, like, compared to, like, C-SPAN is just known for being dry and boring, and it's just, like, really regulated on how we go about our legislative process. There's an emphasis within the confines of Congress in the United States to be, like, to have decorum and to be polite with one another when we're having discussions. It's just something that's very, very American of us. I think it's really healthy in the United States for us to have, like, measured conversations and exchange of ideas. And I really feel like we've lost that recently in the political sphere. There seems to be a lot of, like, vitriol going back and forth and, like, name calling and just general unpleasantness with each other instead of talking about ideas. And so I'm hopeful that we can get back there. But yeah, I feel like it's kind of the thing where if we want that for our country, then we have to voice that opinion at the polls, right? Like, we can say we want that all day long, but if we don't go out and vote for the candidates we feel are getting us closer to the country and temperament that we want to see, then we can say we want that all we want, but, like, it's not going to happen for us. So I think that's what's so cool about coming out of a high control group is getting to have that discussion, and not only getting to have that discussion, but getting to participate in the system of government through our vote and through our voice. I don't know if any of you have engaged in signing petitions or going to political events. I've gotten to do a little bit of that, not too much. I have kind of a full plate with 4 kids and like all the other things that I'm doing all the time. But every time that I have, it has been really meaningful, and it's great to be able to put into action things that matter to me, and things that I feel are important.
Fun, unrelated, semi-related political story talking about petitions and stuff, which I have not. I've actually thought about getting into local government, but Pete's like, oh, Pete's been burned out on politics because Pete actually grew up in a very political family. His dad was, I don't know, a state legislature or what it was, but so Pete's actually had Bernie Sanders in his living room because his dad and Bernie Sanders were political opponents when Bernie Sanders, I think, was the mayor, I think, of Burlington, or I could be getting that wrong. But yeah, so he has interesting stories on that. So I'm like, oh, man, this is driving me nuts. I should go be part of the town board. He's like, no, please don't get into politics. But I know his dad's very, very busy still. They moved from Vermont over to Maine, and he's running around getting signatures and getting petitions signed and stuff. So I think it's great. And you know what? It's awesome that you do that, Christy. And I say more power to you, because we do have a voice and our thoughts do matter. So that's the cool part moving forward that I see.
Christy and Emily, I have so much enjoyed this open conversation that we have had. I feel like we have such different feelings and ideas than we would have had when we were part of a high control group. We have almost the opposite of high control. We have moved so far and grown so much in the way that we think about politics and about ideas and about the other people who live in our country. But I think we would be remiss if we did not talk a little bit about the hype that is going on presently in the high control group we exited, because there is a woman who is running for president. We already heard back when Sarah Palin was a vice president candidate and when Kamala Harris was a vice president candidate about how evil that was and how it was going to be a fulfillment of prophecy because there was going to be a woman who was in leadership, in power in the United States. And now that there's a presidential candidate, potentially, I'm sure that the hype is even higher. Now, I don't hear it because I don't listen to conversations between people who are in the high control group. I have high control group members in my family, but it's not like there would be 2 members talking about what's going on in politics in my presence. It just wouldn't happen. What about you, Emily? Do you hear this kind of conversation?
You know, I've been so busy with the wedding and all that, I've not been near really close to my message family, but I'm sure it's an undertone. And don't forget in that list, Hillary Clinton definitely was a big one too. But thinking about the prophet, didn't he say somehow JFK or somewhere back there was supposed to be a fulfillment? And then wasn't it because Kamala wore purple on the inauguration day that was, some other fulfillment? And I mean, a broke clock is right twice a day too. So eventually, something's going to happen. I'm sure there was tons of prophecies that supposedly came true and came to pass when Obama was president. But how many years ago was that? And we're still here and the world hasn't ended yet. And think about all around the nation, back again to Christian nationalism. Why is it just the U.S. who having a woman president means the end of the world? Why not all these other countries? Isn't there a female in charge in like New Zealand? And I know there definitely has been in the UK. I mean, Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister, and all these others. And let's not forget Queen Elizabeth. Like, how come that version of the Bible didn't exist? Why do the people in the UK and other countries lose out on all these miraculous signs and wonders? Why is it just the US that gets to have all these special things going on? Or do the high control groups in the other countries have their own and they're like, yeah, because Margaret Thatcher or this and that, or, so who knows? You live in your own little insulated world. But is it wrong of me to kind of go, let's just have a woman president, get that out of the way, let the world keep ticking, and let's see what's next and what other weird story they can come up with. I mean, aren't we a year past the prophet's son dying and California's still standing? And I think I just read today that, well, California's still standing, but did you see this beach in Florida went under? Oh man, that's certainly got to be a sign, So it's like pick and choose your own adventure. So let's move into the page of we've had a woman president. Okay, now what?
Yeah, for those in our audience that haven't come out of the same high control group, we probably sound like a little bit crazy when we're talking about California sinking and like somebody dying that was in their 80s, and that's kind of like a crisis for people. So we'll have to discuss like the specifics of our group, but basically, just for like this conversation, there was supposedly a prophecy made in the 1930s about having a woman president, and JFK supposedly fulfilled that because the Catholic Church represents that woman, and so there was the Catholic president, the woman on the throne. There was something about his wife too being like controlling in the political sphere or something. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to have really changed their perspectives on women in leadership. They're not neutral on it. They're very much against it because the prophet said it was bad. So anytime there's a woman on the ballot, that's obviously not God's candidate. And so they're discounting them all the way down the ballot. Women should never be leaders in politics, right? That's kind of the messaging. For me, I think it's kind of funny because it's 50% of the population, y'all. Like there's 50% of the population is female. And if we go farther in time and we start getting more equality, it's naturally going to happen that 50% of the population is going to become more represented in government as we have equal rights and we continue to grow as a society and a culture to respect women and their contributions outside of the home. So yeah, I haven't heard anything specifically because I do not talk to people that are in that particular high control group. That doesn't mean that I haven't heard anything of that nature. I think it's not, isolated to people within our high control group to disparage women in leadership. I think that occurs in various groups. So I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens if we do end up with a woman president, like what the conversation might be moving forward, because there's been this sort of like vagueness about it. But once we actually have a woman president, as William Branham's prophecy foretold, what are they going to do with that when the world keeps spinning? Just like Emily said, what are we going to do with that? Where are we going to go? So hopefully it'll wake up some minds to think about it critically and recognize that a vague prophecy made many, many years ago that supposedly was fulfilled and then supposedly was fulfilled again and again, and now is undisputably having been fulfilled. What does that accomplish for you? What is that doing for you? What's the big thing that's supposed to happen next? So, and when it doesn't come, what are we going to do?
How's that working out for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little disappointed because I have missed my opportunity to be the first female president. I mean, seriously, when I was a little girl, I would have loved to grow up to be either an astronaut or the president. I was very jealous of my brothers who had the opportunity to be an astronaut or the president and chose not to pursue it.
Crazy. What were they thinking?
I don't know.
So just looking, I have access to kind of the dark web. No, not really. I have access to a lot of message groups. The high control group I came out of, I've worked my way in over the years, and am kind of in there silently. So, Bride News, Harris talks about creating opportunity economy. According to other believers, they said that William Branham said she would be beautiful and well dressed. That description does not fit this woman. We believe what Brother Branham said. Let's have our eyes on her. Joe Biden endorses Kamala Harris as presidential candidate. Thus saith the Lord, will never fail. Soon saints will meet in the air. So yeah, during these times, I really feel sorry for the young kids in the groups because they're sitting there brainwashed, terrified. Am I in? Am I not? Am I predestinated? Is the world going to end soon? How's it going to end? Am I going to be raptured? And I just remember all of my stress and anxiety. So kind of, thinking about them during this political time and what they're all going through on their Sunday morning and Sunday night and Wednesday night brainwashing sessions. So, interesting times that we're living in. So yeah, let's just have a woman president, get it out of the way, see what happens, and move on from there.
You are so right, Emily. I remember, I don't know if I was 6 years old, 7 or 8. It was either 76, 77, or 78 that we were at the Branham Tabernacle at Easter. And there was a huge fear that came out through the crowd. And it really, I remember being thankful that John's grandpa, who was pastor at the Branham Tabernacle at the time, tried to sort of downplay it and soft pedal it. Of course, he was no stupid guy, and he knew that if people get their hopes up and believe that, the world is going to end or Jesus is going to return at a certain date, and that doesn't happen, then that takes away some of the credibility of your movement. So he wasn't going to allow that to be a huge thing, but it was huge enough. It was huge enough that I cried as a little girl. I don't remember if I was 6, 7, or 8, but I remember very, very clearly that I cried about that. Mostly because I wanted to grow up. I wanted to grow up and get married and have kids. I didn't want to. There's a song my brother-in-law likes. It goes, everybody wants to go to heaven. Nobody wants to go today.
Yeah. Isn't that something that like the high control group and oftentimes like super partisan politics still use the same arsenal of tools to sort of get people on board with them, right? Like it's all about, if this doesn't happen, it's going to be chaos and pandemonium, and you should be really, really scared of not being in our camp. And I just, having gone through that and come out the other side and I survived, I don't really have that fear, and it's hard to get me worked up to that. So, especially in the political field, I don't get caught up in the whole, like, I'm scared of what's going to happen if this person gets elected, or I'm terrified of the outcome of this election. I really do think that our country, one of the things that makes America unique is that we have systems in place of checks and balances to sort of prevent the instability that happens in other places. Now, that's not a guarantee, right? Like, it's worked so far to prevent instability, so there's nothing that says that that's going to continue, but I think we have a pretty good track record, right? The United States is how old, and we have had the same constitutional framework and the same sort of system in place to ensure the peaceful transfer of power and to ensure election integrity and all of these things that make our country stable and secure. So though I do think about it, and I do have I do read the news, and I do try to stay current on it and pick candidates that I align with in terms of like my viewpoints. It's not a fear that I have that if someone that I don't vote for gets elected, that everything's going to crumble down and everything's going to go to heck and I am going to be stuck here, in the worst case scenario. I've lived through that. If you leave this cult, you're going to definitely go out and get cancer and die in a couple of days. And, all of these horrible things are going to happen to you. And that didn't happen, right? So it's going to be hard to get me to that level of fear again.
That's a great thought, Christy. All right. Emily, do you have any final thoughts to share before we sign off for the evening?
Not particularly. I've kind of enjoyed the conversation we've had, and I liked what Christy was just saying about not living there in just that extreme fear of, oh man, and you hear that, oh my goodness, the political ads on TV when I come home and have lunch. I don't know what group and demographic they think is sitting watching TV at lunch hour, but good grief, the political ads are nasty. And yeah, if this political person wins, the world is going to end, and oh my goodness, then the very next ad is this, flip the script. If this political person wins, it's all going to end. And yeah, it's very, very much like the fear within the high control group. And I mean, we saw that a number of years ago with the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, and just both sides. And violence is never the answer. And I think the political framework of the United States is meant to try to temper that. And I think we need to have trust in that system and realize that, yeah, if, quote unquote, our guy doesn't get in this time, that's okay, because it's not a dictatorship, and it's not where this person's going to be in power for 20 years. There is checks and balances in a lot of the framework of the government. Now that gets me on to, I think there should be term limits in Congress because this 80-year-old person is not speaking for a large majority of the country. So I think that's one area that a little bit of an oopsie maybe, but who knows? At the end of the day, I was just at a football stadium with 78,000 people, and I was telling Pete when we were walking through, yeah, look at this terrible economy, all these people, the stadium was empty, and now everybody's out there buying their $15 beer and, walking around in all their hundreds of dollars of gear and this and that, and, multiply that by 78,000 people. I don't think it's quite as dire as people say out there. So it's interesting, just this overinflated. And if you listen to the news, like, Walter Cronkite, yep, this happened today, that happened today, and there's your news. Have a good night. You turn on one of the news channels at 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, whatever. It's like, today in the Middle East, this happened. And then at this part of the country, this happened. And it sounds like the Southern preacher that's worked himself up into a giant sweat, and you can see his, suspender straps, or the sweat is just oozing out of every pore of his body. It's like they're setting the tone. So I think we can help kind of bring that tone and that temperature down in our own groups, and don't get overwhelmed by it. Like a friend said, focus on where your shadow falls, and focus on your friend group, focus on, if you're working where you're at, and don't build into the hype. I know that's easier said than done, but try not to build into the hype, and try to ask questions. I like to sometimes be a rabble-rouser on Facebook and just post opposing views to wind people up, because I know it will. I don't know if that's good or bad. Probably not. But then sometimes be like, okay, now you did this, and later in the comments go, now let's think about this, So that's, yeah, I can be a bit of a rabble-rouser in that regard. But again, I like seeing and getting both everybody talking together. But it's interesting if you post something, just the attacks that come. It's like, okay, guys, not being super serious here, but just take a step back. It's okay. Take a step back from the ledge. We'll be okay. November is going to come and go, and we're going to be okay. I really, really believe that no matter who gets in, we're going to be fine. It's going to be okay, guys.
I agree. Christy, you have any final words?
No, I would just really encourage people who are maybe new to dipping their toes in the political spectrum, maybe women who've left the high control group and don't really know what they should do about voting, who they should vote for. I would just really encourage them to sit down and if they want to vote, to engage and do it freely and confidently. It's a right that you have in this country that many people have fought for, and we should definitely honor their memories by engaging as much or as little as we choose to do. And then the other thing I would say is that voting is a personal decision. It is a choice that you make who you're going to vote for, what policies are important to you, if there are amendments on the ballot, what you choose, what you think is important for your family and for your personal life. And you don't have to answer to anyone about how you vote. You go into that poll box, it is anonymous, and you cast your vote to match your conscience, and that is all that is required of you. And again, I would strongly encourage anyone who is kind of on the fence on maybe they haven't ever done it before. It's really not scary. And once you do it the one time, you'll get the hang of it. Using your voice is a powerful, powerful thing. The more we practice, the easier it gets.
I have kind of a funny story to tell, and I like that because I like to end on a funny story. So one of the times that I voted in the past few years, and I don't remember if it was the first time or second time. It wasn't. I hadn't been voting very long, but I made a mistake on my ballot and I scribbled something. And when I went to put it through the ballot counter, it didn't go through. It gave an error. But even that is not scary because they have people there to help you, and they just had me do it again. And it was really okay. It was a little embarrassing, but it was not a big deal. But it is definitely something I can look back and laugh at and say, yeah, figure out your judges before you get in the voting booth, because if you mess it up, you're going to have to do the whole ballot over. But anyway, I feel like this conversation has really been great about demonstrating how to move forward. And thank you for listening. We hope you found the show informative and helpful. Feel free to contact us at movingforwardtalkshow.com with any questions you may have or any ideas you have for future shows. I look forward to hearing from you as we continue to demonstrate that life goes on and healing happens as long as you keep moving forward.